Rachel Morgan pulled back the lace curtains of her modest home in Whispering Pines, Colorado, watching as the townsfolk gathered in hushed circles along the dusty main street, their eyes occasionally darting toward her window before quickly looking away, shame mingling with curiosity in their expressions. It was 1879, and in this frontier town nestled between rolling hills and sprawling plains, being widowed once was considered unfortunate. Being widowed twice at the age of 27 made her something of a pariah. A woman whispered about as cursed, or worse yet, somehow responsible for the deaths of the men who had shared her name. She let the curtain fall back into place, her fingers lingering on the worn fabric. The first funeral had barely faded from memory before the second came along, and with it, the whispers had grown louder, the stares colder. The sympathy that had enveloped her after losing Thomas to pneumonia 3 years ago had evaporated entirely when James was thrown from his horse just 14 months after their wedding. Now, 6 months after burying her second husband, Rachel found herself alone in a town that had once welcomed her with open arms. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Rachel smoothed down her black mourning dress, a garment she had worn for far too long, and moved across the wooden floor, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. Mrs. Morgan. Mrs. Abernathy, the wife of the town's only doctor, stood on her porch, a small basket in hand. Though her smile seemed genuine enough, Rachel could see the discomfort in her eyes. "I brought you some fresh bread and preserves. I thought you might appreciate it." "That's very kind of you," Rachel replied, accepting the basket. "Would you like to come in for tea, Mrs.?" Abernathy's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I'm afraid I can't today. So many errands to run, you understand." Her gaze drifted past Rachel into the house, as if expecting to see something out of place or sinister. "But perhaps another time, of course." Rachel nodded, knowing full well that another time would never come. No one in Whispering Pines willingly spent time with her anymore. "Thank you for the bread." After Mrs. Abernathy had hurried down the path, Rachel closed the door and leaned against it, fighting back tears. She had loved both Thomas and James deeply, had nursed them, cared for them, and mourned them. Yet the town had decided that she was somehow at fault, that bad luck or worse followed her like a shadow. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a mockery of the darkness that had settled over Rachel's life. She dressed in her mourning black, as was expected, though she longed to wear the blue dress that hung forgotten in her wardrobe. Today she needed to visit the general store for supplies, an expedition she had been putting off for as long as possible. The bell above the door tinkled cheerfully as she entered Hendrick's general store. Old Mr. Hendricks nodded politely from behind the counter, but the two women examining fabric bolts fell silent, their conversation halting mid-sentence at the sight of her. "Good morning, Mr. Hendricks," Rachel said, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. "I need flour, sugar, coffee, and some lamp oil, please." While Mr. Hendricks gathered her items, Rachel became acutely aware of whispers behind her. "Third time's the charm, they say," one woman murmured to the other. What man would be fool enough to test that theory? Came the reply, followed by poorly suppressed laughter. Rachel kept her back straight, her gaze fixed firmly ahead. She had heard worse in recent months. The women of Whispering Pines seemed particularly bothered by her presence, as if widowhood might be contagious, or perhaps they feared she might set her sights on their husbands next. "That'll be $1.35, Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Hendricks said, his voice kind enough, though he avoided direct eye contact. As Rachel counted out her money, the store door opened again, and the energy in the room shifted palpably. Heavy boots thudded on the wooden floor, accompanied by the jingle of spurs. She felt rather than saw someone come to stand beside her at the counter. "Mornin', Hendricks," a deep voice drawled. "Got that order ready for the XXX." Rachel glanced sideways and upward, taking in the tall figure of a man she didn't recognize. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of a well-worn hat, but she could make out a strong jaw lined with several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and a leather vest hung open over a faded blue shirt. The pistol at his hip looked well used but meticulously maintained. Just finished packing it up this morning, Xavier, Mr. Hendricks replied, his demeanor noticeably warmer. It's in the back. Give me a moment. As Mr. Hendricks disappeared into the storeroom, the stranger Xavier turned slightly, and Rachel found herself under the scrutiny of the most piercing blue eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of the mountain lakes in summer, clear and deep and somehow both warm and cool at once. "Madam," he said with a slight tip of his hat. Rachel nodded in acknowledgement, suddenly conscious of her worn black dress and the dark circles she knew lingered beneath her eyes. "You must be new to town," she said, desperate to fill the awkward silence as the two women behind them continued to whisper. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Not exactly. I've been running cattle at the XXX Ranch for 5 years now, but I tend to keep to myself." "The ranch is a half-day's ride from town." He extended a hand. "Xavier Reed." Rachel hesitated before placing her gloved hand in his. "Rachel Morgan." Something flashed in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, but his expression remained neutral. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Morgan," the way he said Mrs. carried no judgment, no morbid curiosity, just simple respect. It had been so long since anyone in town had spoken to her without an undercurrent of suspicion that Rachel found herself momentarily speechless. Mr. Hendricks returned with a large crate. "Here you are, Xavier. Everything the ranch ordered, plus those books Miss Alina requested." "Much obliged," Xavier replied, lifting the crate effortlessly. He turned back to Rachel. "Good day, Mrs. Morgan. Perhaps we'll meet again." "Perhaps," she echoed, watching as he carried the crate outside to a loaded wagon. "That'll be all, Mrs. Morgan?" Mr. Hendricks asked, drawing her attention back. "Yes, thank you." She gathered her purchases and moved toward the door. "You be careful now, Mrs. Morgan," one of the women called after her, her voice dripping with false concern. "That Xavier Reed is a dangerous man. They say he's killed more than his share in his time." Rachel paused at the door, turning to face the woman. "How interesting that you should warn me about him and not him about me, considering which of us the town believes to be cursed." With that, she stepped outside into the sunlight, ignoring the gasps behind her. As she walked down the boardwalk, Rachel noticed Xavier Reed securing his purchases in the wagon. He looked up as she passed, those blue eyes finding hers again. "Mrs. Morgan," he called, causing her to stop. "I'm heading back to the XXX, but I'll be in town again next Saturday. The ranch is hosting a harvest dance at the community hall. Everyone's welcome." Rachel clutched her basket tighter. "That's very kind, but I don't attend social gatherings anymore." "Shame," he said simply. "Could use some new faces. Gets tiresome looking at the same old cowboys every day." There was something in his tone that suggested he knew exactly why she avoided social events, yet he was extending the invitation anyway. "I'll consider it," she said, though they both knew she wouldn't come. He nodded once and climbed onto the wagon seat. That's all anyone can ask. With a flick of the reins, he set the horses in motion, leaving Rachel standing in the street, watching as he drove away. For the first time in months, Rachel felt a flicker of something other than grief and isolation curiosity about the blue-eyed rancher who seemed untouched by the town's gossip. The week passed slowly, as weeks tended to do for Rachel now. She kept busy with her garden and her needlework, occasionally taking and mending from those in town desperate enough for her skilled hands to overcome their superstitions. On Friday afternoon, as she hung laundry in the yard, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Xavier Reed rode toward her house on a magnificent chestnut gelding, his tall figure easy in the saddle in a way that spoke of years spent on horseback. He reined in at her gate, removing his hat as he dismounted. "Mrs. Morgan," he called. "Hope I'm not intruding." Rachel secured the sheet she'd been hanging and moved toward the fence, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Reed, this is unexpected." "Xavier, please," he said, leading his horse through the gate she opened for him. "I was passing through on my way to check on some strays and thought I'd stop by." Rachel raised an eyebrow, suspicion creeping in. No one just stopped by her house anymore. "Is there something you need, Mr. Reed?" he smiled, a genuine expression that reached those blue eyes. "Xavier," he corrected again. "And yes, actually. I was hoping to convince you to attend the harvest dance tomorrow night." "I already told you that you don't attend social gatherings anymore," he finished for her. "I remember, but I'm hoping you might make an exception." Rachel studied him, trying to discern his motives. "Why is this so important to you? We've only just met." Xavier shifted his weight, his spurs jingling softly. "My sister Alina is visiting from Boston. She's been at the ranch for 2 months and is desperate for female company that doesn't moo or lay eggs." His smile turned wry. "She's read every book in my limited collection twice over and threatened to return east if I don't introduce her to civilized society soon." "And you thought of me?" Rachel couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "I'm hardly considered good society in Whispering Pines these days." Something hardened in Xavier's expression. "I don't put much stock in town gossip, Mrs. Morgan. Never have. My sister is intelligent and kind, but painfully shy in new situations. Having someone to talk to who isn't already caught up in the town's established circles would mean a lot to her." Rachel hesitated. The prospect of facing the entire town in a social setting was daunting, but the idea of meeting someone new, someone who wouldn't judge her based on rumors, was tempting. "Your sister is welcome to visit me here anytime." Xavier shook his head. "Alina needs to get out, meet people, and frankly, so do you." He met her gaze directly. "Unless you plan to let the town's whispers keep you locked away forever." His bluntness was startling. No one spoke to her so directly anymore. "You don't understand what it's like to be the subject of gossip, to have people look at you and see only what they've heard." He laughed, though there was little humor in it. "Mrs. Morgan, I rode into this territory with a reputation that had men reaching for their guns before I'd even introduced myself. I know something about being judged." Rachel was silent for a long moment. "I have nothing suitable to wear," she finally said, the excuse sounding weak even to her own ears. "Wear whatever you like," Xavier replied, "though I'd wager you'd look mighty fine in something other than black." He placed his hat back on his head. "The dance starts at 7. I'll have a wagon come by at 6:30 to collect you and bring you to the hall." He mounted his horse in one fluid motion. "Unless, of course, you tell me right now that you absolutely refuse." Rachel found herself unable to form the refusal. The challenge in his eyes sparked something she had thought long dead: pride, perhaps, or simple defiance. "I'll consider it," she said again, but this time she meant it. Xavier nodded, seemingly satisfied. "That's all I ask. Good day, Mrs. Morgan." As he rode away, Rachel stood by her gate for a long time, wondering what had possessed her to even entertain the idea. Yet as she returned to her laundry, she found herself thinking of the blue dress hanging unworn in her wardrobe. The next evening, Rachel stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. The blue dress, last worn before James's death, fit differently now. Her grief had left her thinner, but the color brought life to her pale skin and complemented the rich auburn of her hair, which she had styled simply but elegantly. For over a year, she had been a ghost in black, moving through the town like a shadow. Tonight, even if only for a few hours, she would be Rachel again, not the twice-widowed Mrs. Morgan that everyone avoided. The sound of a wagon outside told her that her time for second thoughts had run out. Taking a deep breath, Rachel gathered her shawl and reticule and stepped onto the porch just as a young cowboy was raising his hand to knock. "Mrs. Morgan," he asked, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her in blue. "I'm Danny from the XXX. Mr. Reed sent me to fetch you." "Thank you, Danny," Rachel replied, locking her door. "I'm ready." The ride to the community hall was mercifully brief, though Rachel's nerves increased with each passing minute. By the time they arrived, music and laughter were already spilling from the brightly lit building. Danny helped her down from the wagon. "Mr. Reed said to tell you he and Miss Alina will meet you inside. He got held up with some ranch business." Rachel nodded, fighting the urge to climb back into the wagon and demand to be taken home. Instead, she squared her shoulders and walked toward the entrance. The conversations nearest the door faltered as she entered. Heads turned, expressions ranging from surprise to disapproval to outright hostility. Rachel forced herself to keep walking, searching the crowd for Xavier or his sister. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," a voice said loudly enough to carry over the music. Evelyn Turner, the banker's wife and self-appointed guardian of the town's moral standards, stood with a group of women, all watching Rachel with undisguised disdain. and in blue no less. How disrespectful to poor James's memory. Rachel felt her cheeks burn but continued walking, pretending not to hear. She had nearly reached the refreshment table when a young woman with familiar blue eyes approached her. "You must be Mrs. Morgan," the woman said, offering a shy smile. "I'm Xavier Reed. Xavier told me to watch for you. He's been delayed but should be here soon." She glanced around nervously. "I'm so glad you came. I've been dying to meet someone new. The ranch hands are sweet but utterly useless for conversation about anything other than cattle." Rachel found herself smiling at Alina's earnestness. "Please call me Rachel, and thank you for the welcome. I was beginning to regret my decision to come." Alina linked her arm through Rachel's. "Nonsense. You've saved me from another evening of watching people dance while I sit with the matrons. Come, let's get some punch." As they moved through the crowd, Rachel was acutely aware of the stares following them, but Alina either didn't notice or chose to ignore them. "Xavier tells me you live alone in town," Alina said as they sipped punch near the window. "That must be difficult." "It has its challenges," Rachel admitted, "but I manage." "I admire your independence," Alina said. "In Boston, widows are expected to either remarry quickly or move in with family. To maintain your own home shows remarkable strength." Before Rachel could respond, the hall doors opened, and Xavier Reed entered. Even from across the room, his presence commanded attention. He had traded his usual trail clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. His hair, usually hidden beneath his hat, was dark and slightly wavy, combed neatly but with a few rebellious strands falling across his forehead. His eyes scanned the room until they found Rachel and Alina. A smile spread across his face as he made his way toward them. "You came," he said to Rachel, genuine pleasure in his voice. "And you look," he paused, seeming to search for the right word, "alive." It was such an unexpected compliment that Rachel laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "Thank you, I think. I meant it as a compliment," Xavier assured her. "That color suits you far better than black ever could." "I've been telling her the same thing," Alina chimed in. "Rachel, you must know that you look absolutely beautiful tonight." Rachel felt warmth spread through her chest at their kindness. It had been so long since anyone had paid her a genuine compliment that she hardly knew how to respond. The band struck up a lively tune and couples began to move to the dance floor. "Dance with my brother," Alina urged. "He's actually quite good despite his claims to the contrary." Xavier extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor, Mrs. Morgan?" Rachel hesitated, glancing around at the watching townsfolk. "I'm not sure that's wise." "Since when does wisdom dictate joy?" Xavier asked, his hand still outstretched. "One dance, Rachel. Show them you're still here, still living." The use of her given name, spoken with such gentle challenge, decided her. Rachel placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. As they took their positions, she was keenly aware of the space that formed around them, other couples subtly moving away. Xavier seemed not to notice, his attention focused entirely on her as the music began. He was indeed a good dancer, leading her confidently through the steps. Rachel found herself remembering movements her body had forgotten, falling into rhythm with surprising ease. "You dance well for a cowboy," she remarked, relaxing slightly as they moved. "My mother insisted that her children learn the social graces even after we moved west," Xavier replied. "She would have my hide if I stepped on a lady's toes." "Is she still alive, your mother?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, she and my father passed within months of each other about 7 years ago, influenza." "I'm sorry," Rachel said softly. "I know how difficult loss can be." Xavier's eyes met hers, understanding passing between them. "Yes, I believe you do." He guided her through a turn. "Is that why you came west? After your first husband?" Rachel missed a step, surprised by the direct question. "You know about Thomas, small towns talk," Xavier said simply. "And I make it my business to know about interesting people. And you find me interesting." Rachel couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Extraordinarily so," he replied without hesitation. "A young woman who has faced tremendous loss yet still stands tall despite a town determined to break her spirit. Yes, I find that interesting." Rachel felt her cheeks warm. You make me sound far braver than I am. Most days I hide in my house rather than face their whispers. Yet here you are tonight, in blue instead of black, dancing with the most notorious man in the county." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'd call that brave." The music ended and they stood for a moment, still connected by their joined hands. Rachel became aware again of the stares, the whispers. "Perhaps we should return to Alina," she suggested, pulling her hand free. Xavier nodded, but as they turned to leave the dance floor, Evelyn Turner stepped directly into their path, her husband Charles at her side. "Mrs. Morgan," Evelyn said, her voice carrying. "How unexpected to see you here, and in such bright colors." "I wasn't aware your mourning period had concluded," Rachel stiffened. "Good evening, Mrs. Turner. I must say," Evelyn continued, ignoring Rachel's cool tone, "it seems rather disrespectful to poor James's memory. Not to mention Thomas, but then perhaps you're already seeking a third husband." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to Xavier. The hall had grown quieter, people straining to hear the exchange. Rachel felt her hands begin to tremble with anger and humiliation. Before she could respond, Xavier stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Rachel and the Turners. "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice pleasant but carrying an undercurrent of steel, "I've always found that those most concerned with others' mourning practices tend to be those least acquainted with genuine grief." He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Fortunately, Mrs. Morgan doesn't require your approval to attend a public gathering or to wear whatever color she chooses." Charles Turner puffed up his chest. "Now see here, Reed, Charles," Xavier cut him off. "Before you say something that might require a response from me, I suggest you consider whether defending your wife's rudeness is worth the potential consequences." The words were delivered calmly, but something in Xavier's posture made the banker take a step back. Alina appeared at Rachel's side, slipping an arm through hers. "Rachel, I believe Xavier promised to introduce us to the Hendersons. They have that lovely farm near the creek, don't they?" She smiled brightly at the Turners. "If you'll excuse us." Without waiting for a response, Alina guided Rachel away, Xavier following close behind. Once they were across the hall, Rachel released a shaky breath. "I should never have come," she said quietly. "This was a mistake." "Nonsense," Alina insisted. "You have every right to be here." Xavier's expression was grim. "I apologize for the Turners. They've been spreading their particular brand of venom since they arrived in the territory." "It's not just them," Rachel replied. "It's everyone." "Look around, no one wants me here." Xavier's hand came to rest lightly on her arm. "I want you here," he said simply. "Alina wants you here. And frankly, what the rest of them want doesn't matter a damn." "Language, Xavier," Alina scolded, though her eyes twinkled. "Though he's right, of course. What say we give them something real to talk about? Xavier, fetch us some more punch. Rachel and I are going to claim that table by the window and have a marvelous time being the most scandalous women in the room." Despite herself, Rachel laughed. "I believe that title is already mine by default." "Then I shall have to work harder to share it," Alina declared, leading her to the table. For the next hour, Rachel found herself genuinely enjoying the evening. Alina was delightful company, full of stories about Boston society and her adventures since coming west. Xavier divided his time between their table and his duties as one of the hosts, but his eyes frequently sought Rachel's across the room. When the band began a waltz, he appeared at their table again. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Morgan?" Rachel hesitated only briefly before nodding. As they moved onto the floor, she was conscious of fewer stares than before. Perhaps the novelty of her presence had worn off, or maybe the Turners' public rebuke had satisfied the town's appetite for drama. "Thank you," she said as they began to dance. "For what?" "For defending me earlier. For inviting me tonight. For treating me like a person instead of a curiosity." Xavier's expression softened. "You don't need to thank me for common decency, Rachel." "In my experience, decency isn't all that common," she replied. He guided her through a turn, his hand warm and steady at her back. "Then your experience has been with the wrong people." "Perhaps," she conceded, "though I've had little choice in the matter lately." "There's always a choice," Xavier said, "like the one you made tonight to come here despite knowing what you might face." Rachel considered this. I suppose you're right, though I'm still not entirely sure why I came, aren't you? His blue eyes held hers, searching. Before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A man burst into the hall, his clothes disheveled, his face urgent. "Fire," he shouted. "Fire in town. The Morgan place is burning." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. "My house," she whispered. Xavier's arm tightened around her waist, steadying her as the room erupted into activity. "Danny," he called, and the young cowboy who had driven Rachel appeared at his side. "Get the wagon ready, now." Eleanor rushed to Rachel's side. "Oh, Rachel, I'm so sorry." "I need to go," Rachel said, already moving toward the door. "Everything I have is in that house." Within minutes, they were in Xavier's wagon, racing toward town. The glow of flames was visible against the night sky before they even rounded the bend. When they pulled up to Rachel's street, her worst fears were confirmed. Her small house was engulfed in flames, with townspeople forming a bucket brigade from the nearby well. Rachel leapt from the wagon before it had fully stopped, rushing toward her home only to be held back by Sheriff Miller. "You can't go in there, Mrs. Morgan," he said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "But my things, all my memories," Rachel struggled against his grip. "They're just things," Xavier said, appearing at her side. "Nothing worth risking your life for." The sheriff gave Xavier a nod of thanks. "We're doing what we can, but it caught quick. Whole place might be gone before we can stop it." Rachel sagged against Xavier, watching helplessly as flames consumed the roof. "How did it start?" she asked, her voice hollow. Sheriff Miller shook his head. "Can't say for sure yet. You have any lamps burning when you left?" "No," Rachel said firmly. "I checked everything before I locked up." Xavier's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Any idea who might have seen something?" The sheriff's expression grew guarded. "Not yet. We'll investigate once the fire's out." As they stood watching, Rachel became aware of whispers among the gathered crowd. "Cursed, that's what it is." Probably started it herself for the insurance. "God's judgment, if you ask me." Xavier's posture stiffened beside her, but before he could speak, Eleanor pushed through the crowd to join them. "Rachel, you'll stay with us tonight," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "I've already told Danny to let the ranch know to prepare a room." "I couldn't impose," Rachel began. "It's not an imposition," Xavier cut in. "It's the only sensible option, unless you'd prefer to stay in town." Rachel looked around at the faces illuminated by the firelight, some sympathetic, but many others suspicious or openly hostile. "No," she said quietly. "I wouldn't." By midnight, it was clear that the house could not be saved. The flames had died down, leaving only a smoldering shell. Sheriff Miller approached where Rachel sat on the wagon seat, Xavier standing protectively nearby. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm sorry about your home," he said, removing his hat. "We'll look into the cause come morning, but I have to ask, do you have any enemies in town, anyone who might wish you harm?" Rachel laughed bitterly. "Sheriff, half the town crosses the street to avoid walking past me. Take your pick," the sheriff frowned. "That kind of talk won't help us find who did this if it was deliberate." "Are you saying you believe it was arson?" Xavier asked sharply. Sheriff Miller glanced between them. "I'm not saying anything definitive yet, but the fire started awful fast for a house that was supposedly empty and secure." Rachel felt cold despite the lingering heat from the fire. "You think someone set fire to my house deliberately while I was at the dance?" "It's possible," the sheriff admitted. "I'll know more tomorrow." He hesitated. "Mrs. Morgan, it might be best if you stayed out of town for a few days until tempers cool." "Tempers?" Xavier's voice was dangerous. "If someone committed arson, tempers aren't the issue, Sheriff. Criminal charges are." "I'm well aware of the law, Reed," Sheriff Miller replied stiffly. "But I'm also aware of the mood in town. Some folks are already saying this is further proof of Mrs. Morgan's unfortunate luck." "Her luck didn't strike a match," Xavier growled. "Xavier," Eleanor called from the back of the wagon where she had been organizing what few belongings had been salvaged from the yard. "We should get Rachel to the ranch. She's had enough for one night." The sheriff nodded. "That's probably wise. I'll send word when I know more." As they drove away from the smoldering ruins of her home, Rachel sat in numb silence. Everything she owned, every reminder of her past life, her parents' Bible, Thomas's pocket watch, the quilt her grandmother had made for her wedding, all gone. "Rachel," Xavier said softly, his hand steady on the reins. I know it seems impossible now, but this isn't the end. We'll figure this out. We, she echoed, turning to look at him. There is no we, Mr. Reed. There's only me, alone as I've been since James died. Not anymore, Eleanor said firmly from behind them. Not if you don't want to be. Rachel turned back to the road ahead, too exhausted and heartbroken to argue. The embers of her former life glowed in the distance, and ahead lay only uncertainty. The Triple X Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of prime grazing land, the main house a substantial two-story structure of timber and stone. By the time they arrived, it was past 2 in the morning, but lights burned in the windows, and a ranch hand came out immediately to take the horses. Word came ahead about the fire, boss, he said to Xavier. Mrs. Callahan has a room ready for the lady and some hot food waiting. Thank you, Joe, Xavier replied, helping Rachel down from the wagon. Tell the men we'll have a meeting at breakfast. I want a rotation of riders checking the property boundaries until further notice. Rachel stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground, exhaustion and shock taking their toll. Xavier's arm went around her waist, supporting her. Lean on me, he said quietly. You've been through enough tonight to fell a stronger person than most. Too tired to protest, Rachel allowed him to guide her into the house, where a plump, gray-haired woman waited in the entryway. You poor dear, she exclaimed, hurrying forward. I'm Mrs. Callahan, the housekeeper. Come along now, let's get you settled. The next hour passed in a blur as Rachel was shown to a comfortable bedroom, provided with a nightgown and robe that Eleanor insisted she borrow, and coaxed into eating some soup and bread before finally being left alone to rest. Sleep, however, proved elusive. Every time Rachel closed her eyes, she saw flames consuming her home, heard the whispers of the townspeople, felt the weight of their judgment. Near dawn, she finally drifted into a fitful slumber. She awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the distant sounds of a working ranch. For a moment, Rachel couldn't remember where she was or why. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. A soft knock at the door preceded Eleanor's entrance. You're awake, she said, carrying a tray. I thought you might prefer breakfast in your room today. Thank you, Rachel replied, accepting the tray. What time is it? Nearly 10. We thought it best to let you sleep. Eleanor perched on the edge of the bed. Xavier rode into town at first light to speak with the sheriff. He should be back soon. Rachel sipped the hot coffee, grateful for its warmth. You and your brother have been very kind, but I can't impose on you indefinitely. I need to figure out what to do next. There's no rush, Eleanor assured her. You're welcome here for as long as you need. The townspeople will talk, Rachel warned. They'll say terrible things about your brother for taking me in. Eleanor's expression hardened. Let them. Xavier has never cared what people think, and neither do I. After breakfast, Eleanor provided Rachel with a simple day dress left by our cousin who visited last summer. It should fit well enough, and gave her a tour of the main house. It was larger than Rachel had initially thought, with a spacious kitchen, dining room, library, and several bedrooms upstairs. Xavier's parents built this place 20 years ago, Eleanor explained as they entered the library. They came west from Boston after their wedding and established the ranch. Xavier was born right here in this house. Rachel ran her fingers along the spines of the books that lined one wall. It's a beautiful home. It is, Eleanor agreed, though lonely at times. I've been trying to convince Xavier to find a wife, but he's stubborn. Says he hasn't found a woman willing to put up with him and his ways. She smiled mischievously. Perhaps that's changing. Rachel felt her cheeks warm. Eleanor, if you're implying, I'm not implying anything, Eleanor said innocently, merely observing that my brother seems quite taken with you. He feels sorry for me, Rachel corrected. There's a difference. Eleanor looked as though she might argue further, but the sound of horses outside drew their attention. They moved to the window to see Xavier dismounting, his expression grim as he spoke with several ranch hands. Something's wrong, Eleanor murmured, already moving toward the door. They met Xavier in the entryway as he removed his hat and gloves. His eyes found Rachel immediately, a mix of anger and concern in their blue depths. What happened? Eleanor asked. Xavier ran a hand through his hair. The sheriff confirmed it was arson. Someone deliberately set fire to Rachel's house. Rachel felt her knees weaken. Alina guided her to a nearby chair. Did they catch who did it? No, Xavier said grimly, but there were boot prints behind the house and traces of coal oil. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. But why? Rachel whispered. Why would anyone want to burn down my home? Xavier knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. Sheriff Miller thinks it might be related to some of the rumors in town. He's questioning people, but he hesitated. But no one will talk, Rachel finished for him. They all think I deserved it somehow. Not all of them, Xavier corrected. Mr. Hendricks from the store has offered to extend credit so you can replace necessities, and Reverend Williams said the church could take up a collection. Charity, Rachel said bitterly. That's all I have left. Xavier squeezed her hands. It's not charity to help a neighbor who's been wronged. It's basic human decency. The same decency that led someone to burn down my home. Rachel pulled her hands free and stood. Excuse me, I need some air. She fled the house, not caring where she was going, just needing to escape the pity in their eyes. The ranch yard gave way to a garden, and beyond that, a small apple orchard. Rachel found herself beneath the trees, their branches heavy with ripening fruit, before her legs finally gave out. She sank onto the grass, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know how long she sat there before the sound of approaching footsteps made her hastily wipe at her cheeks. Alina, please, I just need some time, she began, but it was Xavier who appeared between the trees. Not Alina, he said quietly. Though she's worried about you, we both are. Rachel turned away. I'm fine. No, you're not. Xavier settled onto the grass beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence. And you don't have to be. Anyone would be devastated by what you've endured. It's not just the fire, Rachel admitted after a long silence. It's everything. For months, I've felt like I'm drowning while everyone watches from the shore, unwilling to throw a rope. She plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. I loved my husbands, Xavier, both of them. I mourned them both deeply, but somehow in this town my grief became something ugly, something suspicious. People fear what they don't understand, Xavier said. And twice widowed young women aren't common on the frontier. So that justifies their cruelty, their suspicion, Rachel shook her head. I nursed Thomas through pneumonia for weeks before he died. I held James's broken body after his fall and felt his last breath against my cheek. Yet they whisper that I somehow caused these tragedies. Xavier was silent for a moment. After my parents died, I went a little wild, he finally said. Got into some trouble back east, then more trouble when I first came to Colorado. Fought when I should have walked away, drew my gun when words would have sufficed. He looked out across the orchard. People started telling stories, some true, most exaggerated, a few completely fabricated, but they all painted the same picture: Xavier Reed, dangerous man, killer, someone to fear. Is that why you stay out here away from town? Rachel asked. Partly, he admitted. Though mostly I stay because I love this land, this ranch. He turned to look at her directly. But I learned something important from those years. You can't control what others think of you, only how you respond to it. And how should I respond to losing everything I own because of others' suspicions? Rachel asked, her voice breaking. By refusing to let them win, Xavier said simply. By living your life on your terms, not theirs, Rachel laughed humorlessly. Easy to say when you have all this, she gestured at the ranch surrounding them, and I have nothing. You have more than you realize, Xavier countered. You have courage, intelligence, and a strength that most men I know couldn't match. His voice softened. And you have friends, Rachel, whether you want them or not. Something in his tone made her look at him, really look at him. The morning sun filtered through the apple leaves, dappling his face with light and shadow. His eyes held a warmth she hadn't fully appreciated before, and the lines at their corners spoke of both laughter and hardship. This was a man who understood loss, who had faced judgment and survived it. Why are you doing this? She asked. Taking me in, defending me to the town, sitting here now listening to me cry about my troubles. Xavier seemed to consider his answer carefully. At first it was simple decency. No one should be treated the way the town treats you. He paused. But now. Now I think it's because in you I see someone worth knowing, someone who, despite everything, hasn't let bitterness consume her. Hasn't it? Rachel asked quietly. No, Xavier said with certainty. Anger, yes, grief, absolutely, but not bitterness, not yet. They sat in silence for a time, the orchard peaceful around them. Finally, Rachel sighed. I should apologize to Alina for running off. She understands, Xavier assured her, but we should head back. Sheriff Miller is riding out this afternoon to update us on the investigation. He stood and offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Rachel took it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. They stood close, their hands still joined, and Rachel found herself studying the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers that held hers so carefully. Thank you, she said softly, for finding me. Xavier's eyes held hers. I'll always find you, Rachel, that's a promise. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Rachel wasn't ready to name. Finally, she withdrew her hand and stepped back. We should go. As they walked back to the house, Rachel felt something shift inside her, not healing, not yet, but perhaps the first acknowledgement that healing might someday be possible. Sheriff Miller arrived shortly after lunch, his expression grave as he removed his hat in the parlor. Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Reed, Miss Reed, he greeted them. I wish I had better news. You haven't found who set the fire, Xavier stated rather than asked. No, the sheriff confirmed, but there's been talk in town, ugly talk. Rachel straightened in her chair. What kind of talk? Sheriff Miller looked uncomfortable. Some folks are saying the fire was divine intervention, that it's a sign you should leave Whispering Pines. Divine intervention, Alina exclaimed. That's preposterous, I agree, Miss Reed, the sheriff said placatingly. But that doesn't change the sentiment in town, and I'm concerned it might not stop with the fire. Xavier's posture tensed. Are you saying Rachel is in danger? I'm saying caution would be wise, Sheriff Miller replied. At least until tempers cool, Mrs. Morgan might consider visiting relatives elsewhere for a time. I have no relatives, Rachel said flatly. And I won't be driven from my home, she stopped, reality hitting her anew, my former home. You have a home here, Xavier said firmly, for as long as you need it. The sheriff glanced between them, his expression unreadable. That's generous of you, Reed, though it might fuel certain rumors. I don't give a damn about rumors, Xavier replied, his tone dangerous. Someone committed a crime against Mrs. Morgan. I expect you to find who did it and bring them to justice, not suggest she run away. Sheriff Miller bristled. I'm doing my job, Reed, but this is a delicate situation. Mrs. Morgan's reputation in town has nothing to do with the fact that someone committed arson, Xavier cut in. Or are you suggesting she somehow deserved to have her home burned down? Of course not, the sheriff backtracked. I'm merely pointing out the realities we're facing. The town is divided and emotions are running high. Then do your job and calm them down, Xavier insisted. Make it clear that criminal acts won't be tolerated, regardless of who the victim is, the sheriff sighed. I'll do what I can, but Mrs. Morgan, he turned to Rachel, please be careful. Don't come into town alone for a while. After he left, an uneasy silence settled over the parlor. Finally, Alina stood. I think I'll check with Mrs. Callahan about dinner. Excuse me. When they were alone, Rachel turned to Xavier. He's right, you know, my staying here will only fuel gossip. Let it, Xavier said dismissively. I've never cared what the town thinks of me. But I care what they might do to you or to your ranch, Rachel replied. These people burned down my home, Xavier. What might they do to someone they see as helping me? Xavier moved to sit beside her on the settee. Rachel, listen to me. The XXX is not some small homestead that can be intimidated. I employ 20 men, all of whom are fiercely loyal and well-armed. No one from town would dare cause trouble here. You can't be certain of that. I can, he insisted. And more importantly, I won't let fear of what might happen dictate my actions. That's how bullies win. Rachel studied him, this man who had inserted himself into her life so unexpectedly. You're a surprising person, Xavier Reed. How so? Most men in your position would keep their distance from someone like me. Too much complication, too much potential for trouble. Xavier smiled slightly. I've never been one to avoid complications when they're worthwhile. And I'm worthwhile, Rachel asked, only half joking. More than you know, he replied, his voice suddenly serious. The intensity in his eyes made Rachel look away, her heart beating faster. I should help Alina with dinner preparations. Xavier caught her hand as she stood. Rachel, he said softly, I meant what I said earlier. You have a home here for as long as you want it. Thank you, she replied, gently withdrawing her hand. But I can't hide at your ranch forever. Eventually, I'll need to decide what comes next. Of course, Xavier agreed, but there's no rush. Take the time you need to heal, to think clearly about your future. As Rachel left the parlor, she wondered if a future was even possible in Whispering Pines now, and if not there, where would she go? What would she do? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswerable for now. The next few days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Rachel helped Mrs. Callahan with household tasks, refusing to be treated as a guest when there was work to be done. Alina proved to be a delightful companion, teaching Rachel to play chess in the evenings and sharing books from the library. And Xavier, when not busy with ranch work, sought Rachel's company in small ways, asking her opinion on a passage he was reading, inviting her to walk with him to check on a new foal, sitting beside her at dinner. On the fourth day after the fire, Xavier announced at breakfast that he needed to go into town for supplies. I'll come with you, Rachel said immediately. Xavier's eyebrows rose. Are you sure that's wise? The sheriff suggested. I know what he suggested, Rachel interrupted. But I can't hide forever. Besides, I need to see what's left of my house, make arrangements for the property. Xavier studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, we'll leave in an hour. As they rode toward town in the wagon, Rachel felt her anxiety growing. She hadn't been back since the night of the fire, and she dreaded facing both the ruins of her home and the townspeople who had turned against her. We don't have to do this today, Xavier said, noting her tense posture. It can wait. No, Rachel said firmly. It can't. I need to face this. Xavier reached across the seat and squeezed her hand briefly. Then you won't face it alone. Whispering Pines appeared much as it always had as they drove down the main street, the general store bustling with customers, children playing near the schoolhouse, women chatting outside the millinery. But as the wagon passed, conversations paused, heads turned, and the familiar whispers began. Rachel kept her gaze forward, her back straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cowed. They stopped first at the sheriff's office, where they learned there had been no progress in the arson investigation. People aren't talking, Sheriff Miller said apologetically, but I'm still asking questions. Next, they visited the bank to discuss Rachel's financial situation. Mr. Turner was coolly professional, confirming that her modest savings remained intact and that the property, once cleared, was still hers to sell or rebuild upon. Though who would buy it now is anyone's guess, he added with poorly disguised satisfaction. Property values tend to drop after such unfortunate incidents. Xavier's jaw tightened, but Rachel placed a warning hand on his arm. Thank you for the information, Mr. Turner, she said calmly. I'll consider my options. As they left the bank, Xavier muttered, that man takes entirely too much pleasure in others' misfortunes. He always has, Rachel agreed. Even before everything, their next stop was the general store where Xavier needed to place orders for the ranch. Mr. Hendricks greeted them warmly enough, though his wife, working alongside him, gave Rachel a wide berth. Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Hendricks said as Xavier examined a ledger of available goods. I want you to know that not everyone in town believes those rumors. Some of us remember how you cared for both your husbands, how devoted you were. Rachel was surprised by the unexpected kindness. Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. That means a great deal. If you need anything supplies to get back on your feet, you come see me, he continued. Credits available to you. That's very kind, but no buts, Mr. Hendricks interrupted. It's the least I can do. This town hasn't treated you fairly, and I'm sorry for it. Xavier rejoined them, having completed his business. Ready to go, Rachel, she nodded, still touched by Mr. Hendricks' words. As they left the store, Xavier said, There are good people here. Not everyone is like the Turners. I know, Rachel replied, but sometimes it's hard to remember that when the good ones stay silent while the cruel ones speak loudly. Their final stop was Rachel's property. The wagon wheels crunched over broken glass and charred wood as they approached what remained of her home. The structure was completely destroyed, only the stone chimney still standing amid the blackened ruins. Rachel climbed down from the wagon slowly, her legs unsteady as she approached the devastation. Everything was gone: the parlor where she had read in the evenings, the kitchen where she had baked bread and prepared meals, the bedroom where she had slept alone since James's death. All reduced to ash and twisted metal, she felt Xavier's presence beside her but couldn't look at him, afraid she might break down completely if she saw sympathy in his eyes. "It's really gone," she said softly. "Everything." "Not everything," Xavier replied. "You're still here, Rachel. You survived. But to what end?" she asked, gesturing at the ruins. "To rebuild here where I'm hated, to move on to another town where no one knows me, to become someone's housekeeper or companion because a twice-widowed woman has few other options." Xavier turned her gently to face him. "Or to start fresh, on your own terms, to build a life that isn't defined by loss or by others' judgments." "That's a lovely dream," Rachel said, "but dreams require resources. I have some savings, but not enough to start over entirely." "Then don't do it alone," Xavier said, his voice low and intense. "Accept help from those who want to give it." Rachel studied his face, trying to understand what he was offering. "Xavier," before she could continue, a woman's voice called out, "Well, if it isn't the Black Widow herself, come to inspect her handiwork." They turned to see Evelyn Turner standing at the edge of the property, her husband and several other townspeople behind her. "What are you implying, Mrs. Turner?" Xavier demanded, stepping slightly in front of Rachel. "I'm not implying anything, Mr. Reed," Evelyn replied sweetly. "I'm stating plainly what everyone knows: that woman," she pointed at Rachel, "burned down her own house for the insurance money. Just like she probably helped her husbands along to their graves for the same reason." A shocked murmur ran through the small crowd that had gathered. Rachel felt as though she'd been struck. "That's a dangerous accusation, Mrs. Turner," Xavier said, his voice deadly quiet. "One that could be considered slander." "It's only slander if it isn't true," Evelyn retorted, "and we all know the truth about Rachel Morgan." Rachel pushed past Xavier to face Evelyn directly. "What truth is that exactly? That I loved my husbands, that I mourned them? That I've done nothing to deserve your cruelty except experience loss?" "Oh, please," Evelyn scoffed. "Thomas was healthy until he married you, and everyone knows James was an excellent horseman, too excellent to fall from a horse by accident. That's enough." Xavier's voice cut through the growing murmurs. "Mrs. Turner, you and your companions are trespassing on Mrs. Morgan's property. I suggest you leave before I summon the sheriff." Charles Turner stepped forward. "You're not in charge here, Reed. This is town business." "Harassing a widow is town business," Xavier challenged. "Accusing her of murder without evidence is town business. We're just saying what everyone's thinking," Charles insisted. "Not everyone," came a new voice. Mr. Hendricks pushed through the crowd to stand beside Rachel and Xavier. "I've known Rachel Morgan since she came to Whispering Pines as a bride. She's a good woman who's suffered enough without your vicious rumors, Evelyn." Reverend Williams appeared next, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Turner, Mr. Turner, this gathering borders on mob behavior. As your spiritual leader, I must ask you all to disperse and examine your consciences. Judge not, lest ye be judged." Evelyn's face flushed with anger. "You're taking her side, after everything?" "I'm taking the side of Christian charity and basic human decency," the Reverend replied firmly. "As should all of you." The confrontation might have escalated further if Sheriff Miller hadn't arrived, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Just a difference of opinion, Sheriff," Charles Turner said smoothly. "A difference of opinion that involves trespassing and slander," Xavier countered. Sheriff Miller surveyed the scene, his expression grim. "Everyone who doesn't have business on this property needs to leave. Now." Reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse, though Evelyn Turner shot Rachel a venomous look as she departed. When only Rachel, Xavier, Mr. Hendricks, Reverend Williams, and the sheriff remained, Rachel finally allowed her shoulders to slump. "Thank you," she said to Mr. Hendricks and Reverend Williams, "for speaking up. Should have done it sooner," Mr. Hendricks admitted. "Let things go too far." "It's not too late to make amends," Reverend Williams said gently. "Mrs. Morgan, the church has taken up a collection to help you rebuild if that's what you wish to do. Rachel looked around at the ruins of her home, then at the town beyond. I don't know if I can stay here, Reverend, not after everything. I understand, he said sadly. But the offer stands, whatever you decide. After the Reverend and Mr. Hendricks had gone, Sheriff Miller approached. Mrs. Morgan, I want you to know I'm still investigating the fire, but after what I just witnessed, I have to advise caution. Tensions are high. They've always been high, Sheriff, Rachel replied wearily. It's just that now they're out in the open. All the more reason to be careful, he insisted. I'd suggest staying at the XXX a while longer if Mr. Reed is amenable. Xavier nodded. Of course. When the sheriff had gone, Rachel and Xavier stood alone amid the ruins. I want to look through what's left, she said. There might be something salvageable. They spent the next hour carefully picking through the debris. Most items were completely destroyed, but in what had been her bedroom, Rachel found a small metal box, its contents largely protected from the flames. Inside were a few photographs, her wedding rings, and a lock of hair from each of her husbands. Something, at least, she said, clutching the box to her chest. Xavier had been examining the chimney and what remained of the foundation. The stonework is solid, he observed. If you wanted to rebuild, this could be a starting point. Rachel looked around at the charred remains of her life. I don't know if I can, she admitted. Even if the town suddenly accepted me, I'd always remember this when I looked at these walls. Xavier moved to stand beside her. Then don't rebuild here. Sell the land when you're ready and use the money to start fresh. He hesitated. But don't decide anything today. You've been through enough. As they drove back to the XXX, Rachel felt oddly lighter, as if seeing the full extent of the destruction had released something within her. The grief and anger were still there, but alongside them was a growing sense of possibility, of doors closing but perhaps others opening. Thank you for coming with me today, she said as the ranch came into view. I couldn't have faced that alone. Xavier's hands were steady on the reins, his profile strong against the afternoon sun. You're stronger than you think, Rachel. You would have managed. He glanced at her. But I'm glad I could be there. Something in his voice made her heart flutter in a way it hadn't in a very long time. Rachel looked away, suddenly afraid of what she might see in his eyes or what he might see in hers. That evening, after dinner, Alina announced that she had a headache and would retire early, leaving Rachel and Xavier alone in the parlor. Rachel suspected the headache was a convenient excuse, given the meaningful look Alina had shot her before departing, but she couldn't bring herself to be annoyed. Xavier poured them each a small glass of brandy and settled into the chair across from Rachel. How are you feeling after today? Rachel considered the question carefully. Oddly peaceful in a way, seeing the house, confronting Evelyn Turner, it was difficult but necessary. I've been living in a kind of limbo, waiting for something to change. Now I know it won't, not if I stay in Whispering Pines. So you've decided to leave? Xavier asked, his expression unreadable. I think I must, Rachel replied, but I don't know where I'll go or what I'll do when I get there. She sipped her brandy, letting the warmth spread through her. I have some skills I can sew, cook, keep accounts. Perhaps I could find work as a housekeeper or companion. Is that what you want? Xavier's voice was gentle. To work in someone else's home, Rachel laughed softly. What I want and what's possible are often different things, Xavier, especially for a woman in my position. He leaned forward, the firelight playing across his features. Tell me what you want, Rachel. If circumstances were no obstacle, what would you choose? The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her desires, her dreams. I'd want a home, she said finally. Not just a house, but a true home. Somewhere I belonged, where I wasn't viewed with suspicion or pity. She stared into her glass. I'd want purpose, work that mattered, that made a difference. And love, Xavier asked quietly, would you want that again? Rachel's eyes met his, startled by the directness of the question. I don't know, I've loved and lost twice. The thought of risking that pain again is terrifying. Yet you still believe in it, Xavier observed. In love. Do I? I think you must, he said. Otherwise, why would the risk frighten you? Rachel considered this. Perhaps you're right. Despite everything, some foolish part of me still believes that love is possible, that it's worth the pain it might bring. She set her glass down. Does that make me naive? It makes you brave, Xavier replied. Braver than most. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. Finally, Rachel asked, "And you, do you believe in love, Xavier Reed?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I didn't used to. Thought it was something people invented to make sense of attraction and convenience." He met her gaze steadily. "I've been revising that opinion lately." Rachel felt her cheeks warm, and not from the brandy. "Because of Alina's influence. Because of yours," he said simply. The directness of his answer left her speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Xavier stood and moved to stoke the fire, giving her a moment to collect herself. "I should probably say good night," Rachel said, rising from her chair. "It's been a long day." Xavier turned to face her. "Rachel," he began, then seemed to reconsider. "Sleep well." She nodded and moved toward the door, but something made her pause and look back at him. "Xavier?" "Yes, thank you for asking what I want. It's been a long time since anyone has." His smile was gentle. "I'll always want to know what you want, Rachel. Remember that." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Rachel felt a strange mixture of emotions: confusion, fear, and something dangerously close to hope. Xavier Reed was unlike any man she had ever known, and his presence in her life was becoming increasingly difficult to categorize as mere friendship or charity. The next morning, Rachel woke early, her mind clearer than it had been in months. She dressed in another of the borrowed dresses and made her way downstairs, intending to help Mrs. Callahan with breakfast. To her surprise, she found Xavier already in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in hand, discussing the day's work with his foreman. "Good morning," she said, hesitating in the doorway. Both men looked up, the foreman touching his hat respectfully. "Morning, madam," he said. "I'll see to those fences right away, boss." With that, he nodded to Xavier and departed through the back door. "You're up early," Xavier observed, pouring a cup of coffee and offering it to Rachel. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, accepting the cup. "Too many thoughts. About yesterday, about everything." Rachel leaned against the kitchen counter. "I've made a decision, Xavier. I'm going to sell the property in town as soon as possible. There's no point in rebuilding there, not when the memories would be tainted by what happened." Xavier nodded slowly. "That seems wise, and after you sell, that's where my thinking stalls," Rachel admitted. "I could go to Denver, I suppose. A larger city might offer more opportunities for a woman alone." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes. "Or you could stay," he said quietly. Rachel's heart skipped. "Here at the XXX? Yes." Xavier set his coffee down and moved closer to her. "Not as a guest or a charity case, but as—" He hesitated, seemingly searching for the right words. "As what, Xavier?" Rachel whispered, scarcely daring to breathe. "As whatever you want to be," he said finally. "A partner. In the ranch, in life, in everything." Rachel stared at him, unable to process what he seemed to be suggesting. "Xavier, if you're proposing some sort of arrangement out of pity," he almost laughed. "Rachel, the last thing I feel for you is pity. Admiration, yes. Respect, absolutely. And something else that I've been trying to ignore because I feared it would frighten you away." "What?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Xavier took her hands in his. "Love, Rachel. I'm falling in love with you." The coffee cup slipped from Rachel's grasp, shattering on the floor between them. Neither moved to clean it up. "That's impossible," Rachel said shakily. "You've known me barely 2 weeks. And in that time, I've seen your courage, your resilience, your kindness despite having every reason to be bitter," Xavier replied. "I've watched you face down a town that turned against you with more dignity than most men could muster. I've seen the way you are with Alina, with Mrs. Callahan, with the ranch hands treating everyone with respect regardless of their station." Rachel shook her head, pulling her hands free. "You can't love me. Everyone who loves me dies, Xavier. The town is right about that much. I'm cursed." "Nonsense," he said firmly. "You've experienced terrible tragedy, yes, but that doesn't make you cursed, and it certainly doesn't make you unlovable." "You don't understand," Rachel insisted, stepping back. "I can't do this again. I can't love someone only to lose them. It would destroy me completely this time." Xavier didn't move to follow her. "I understand fear, Rachel. I've felt it myself, but I've never let it dictate my choices, and I don't believe you want to either." This isn't about what I want, Rachel said, tears threatening. It's about what I can bear. Then tell me you feel nothing for me, Xavier challenged gently. Tell me that, and I'll never speak of this again. Rachel opened her mouth to say just that, to deny the feelings that had been growing within her since that first meeting in the general store, but the words wouldn't come. Because they would be a lie, I can't, she whispered instead. Xavier's expression softened. I'm not asking for an answer now, Rachel. I know this is unexpected, perhaps unwelcome. I'm only asking that you don't run away from the possibility before giving us a chance. Rachel took a deep, shaky breath. I need time, Xavier, time to think, to be sure. Take all the time you need, he said. I'm not going anywhere. The sound of Mrs. Callahan's approaching footsteps broke the moment. Rachel quickly knelt to gather the broken pieces of the coffee cup, grateful for the distraction. What happened here? Mrs. Callahan exclaimed, hurrying to help. Just a bit of clumsiness on my part, Rachel said, avoiding Xavier's gaze. I'll clean it up. Nonsense, Mrs. Callahan insisted. Mr. Reed, you're tracking through coffee. Out of my kitchen, both of you. I'll handle this. As they left the kitchen, Rachel kept a careful distance from Xavier. I think I'll take a walk, she said. Clear my head, Xavier nodded, respecting her need for space. Of course. I have work to do with the herd today, but I'll be back for dinner. Rachel spent the morning walking the boundaries of the ranch house grounds, her mind in turmoil. Xavier Reed loved her, or thought he did, and she. What did she feel? Attraction, certainly. Respect and admiration, without question. But love? After everything, could she risk her heart again? By midday, she found herself in the apple orchard where they had talked days earlier. She sat beneath one of the trees, leaning against its trunk and closing her eyes. The sun filtered through the leaves, warming her face, and for the first time in a long while, Rachel allowed herself to imagine a future not a bleak one of loneliness and struggle, but one filled with possibility. A future at the XXX with Xavier and Alina becoming part of something larger than her own grief. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. There you are, Alina's voice broke into her thoughts. I've been looking everywhere for you. Rachel opened her eyes to see Xavier's sister approaching, a basket over her arm. I needed some time to think. Alina settled onto the grass beside her. About my brother's declaration of love, I assume. Rachel stared at her. How did you? Xavier told me before he left with the men, Alina explained. He wanted me to know in case you seemed upset or confused. She opened her basket, revealing bread, cheese, and apples. I thought you might be hungry. Thank you, Rachel said, accepting a piece of bread. I am confused, Alina. Everything is happening so fast. 2 weeks ago, I was alone in a town that hated me. Now I'm here with you and Xavier, and he's talking about love and partnership, and I don't know what to think. Alina sliced an apple, her movements precise. May I be completely honest with you, Rachel? Of course. My brother is not a man who falls in love easily. In fact, I've never seen him like this before. She handed Rachel an apple slice. He's always been reserved, cautious with his emotions. But with you, from the very beginning, he's been different. More open, more himself. Rachel nibbled at the apple, considering Alina's words. But how can he be sure? How can either of us be sure after such a short time? Some people search their whole lives for certainty and never find it, Alina replied. Others recognize truth when it stands before them, however unexpected its appearance. She smiled gently. Xavier has always been the latter type. And if I'm not? Rachel asked. If I need more time, more assurance, then he'll wait, Alina said simply. He told you as much, didn't he? Rachel nodded, recalling his words. He did. The question isn't whether Xavier loves you, Rachel. It's whether you're willing to open your heart again despite the risk. Alina's gaze was kind but direct. No one can answer that but you. They ate in companionable silence for a time. Finally, Rachel said, I care for him, Alina, more than I thought possible after everything that's happened, but I'm afraid of losing him as you lost Thomas and James. Yes, Rachel admitted. But also of what people will say. The town already thinks the worst of me. If I move from widowhood to a new relationship so quickly, since when do you live your life according to what that town thinks? Alina interrupted. They've already shown their true colors, Rachel. Why give them power over your happiness now? The question struck Rachel forcefully. Why indeed? Hadn't she already lost everything that tied her to Whispering Pines? Why should their opinions matter anymore? You're right, she said slowly. I've been so focused on what I've lost, on what others think of me, that I've forgotten how to consider what I want. And what do you want, Rachel Morgan? Eleanor asked softly. Rachel looked out across the orchard to the ranch beyond, to the rolling hills and vast sky. I want to feel alive again, she said, the truth of it resonating within her. I want to build something lasting, something meaningful. I want. She hesitated, then admitted what her heart had known for days. I want a chance with Xavier to see if what's growing between us can flourish. Eleanor smiled broadly. Then tell him that. It's not that simple, Rachel protested. There are practical considerations. I have nothing to bring to a marriage, Eleanor. My house is gone, my possessions burned. All I have are my savings and the property in town. If you think Xavier cares about any of that, you don't know him at all, Eleanor replied. He has enough for both of you. What he doesn't have, what he's never had, is someone to share it with, someone who sees him for who he truly is. And who is he truly? Rachel asked. Beyond the reputation, beyond the ranch owner I've come to know, Eleanor considered the question. He's a man of deep feeling who hides it behind practicality. He's loyal to a fault, stubborn as the day is long, and has an unexpected gentle side that few ever see. She smiled fondly. He's my brother and I love him dearly, but he's been alone too long, just as you have. Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes. I thought I'd never feel this way again, Eleanor. After James died, I closed that part of myself off. I had to survive. But now I feel it opening again, like a flower after winter, Rachel admitted. And it's wonderful and terrifying all at once. Eleanor took her hand. Then embrace the wonder, Rachel. The terror will fade in time. As they walked back to the house together, Rachel felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she was eager to find out. That evening, Xavier returned later than expected, his clothes dusty from the trail, his expression weary. Rachel, who had been watching for him from the parlor window, met him in the entryway. Difficult day, she asked. Found some cattle straying near the north boundary, he explained, removing his hat and gloves. Took longer than expected to round them up. He studied her face. How was your day? Illuminating, Rachel replied. I spent much of it thinking about what you said this morning. Xavier stilled, his eyes intent on hers. And I'd like to talk if you're not too tired. I'm never too tired to talk with you, he said simply. After Xavier had washed away the trail dust and changed his clothes, they walked together in the garden behind the house. The evening was mild, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Eleanor told me you spoke with her today, Xavier said as they strolled between flowering bushes. She found me in the orchard, Rachel confirmed. She brought lunch and wisdom in equal measure. Xavier smiled. My sister has an abundance of both. They reached a small bench beneath a trellis of climbing roses and sat, a careful distance between them. Rachel gathered her courage. Xavier, what you said this morning took me by surprise, she began. Not just because it was unexpected, but because I had convinced myself that such feelings weren't possible for me anymore. He remained silent, giving her space to continue. After Thomas died, I thought I would never love again. Then James came into my life and I discovered my heart could heal, could open again. Rachel's voice softened. When I lost him too, I believed that was it. That fate or God or whatever forces govern our lives was telling me I wasn't meant for love. And now? Xavier asked quietly. Rachel turned to face him fully. Now I'm beginning to wonder if I was wrong, if perhaps each loss, painful as it was preparing me for something else, something I couldn't have imagined. Hope flickered in Xavier's eyes, something like what we might build together. Yes, Rachel admitted. Though I'm still afraid, Xavier, not just of losing again, but of what people will say, of how quickly this is happening. People will always talk, Xavier said dismissively. As for the timing, life doesn't always follow the neat schedules society prescribes, Rachel. Sometimes the heart knows what it wants long before convention says it should. And your heart wants me? Rachel asked, needing to hear it again. Xavier reached for her hand, his touch gentle. My heart, my mind, every part of me wants you, Rachel Morgan. Not out of pity or convenience, but because in you, I've found someone who understands me, challenges me, makes me want to be better than I am." Rachel felt tears well in her eyes. "I haven't allowed myself to acknowledge it, but I feel the same way about you. You came into my life when I was at my lowest point, and instead of offering pity, you offered respect. Instead of seeing a victim, you saw strength I didn't know I still possessed." Xavier's hand tightened on hers. "Does this mean?" "It means I want to try, Xavier," Rachel said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I want to see where this leads us, even though it terrifies me. I want to believe in love again." The smile that transformed Xavier's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her hand to his lips. "That's all I ask. A chance to show you that love doesn't always end in loss, that sometimes it leads to the very thing you've been searching for all along." "And what is that?" Rachel asked. "Home," Xavier said simply. "Not just a place, but a feeling, belonging, security, joy." His blue eyes held hers. "That's what I feel when I'm with you, Rachel. Like I've found my way home after a long journey." The beauty of his words overwhelmed her. Without thinking, Rachel leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a kiss as gentle as it was profound. Xavier remained perfectly still for a heartbeat, then responded with equal tenderness, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. When they parted, Rachel felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not the entirety of her grief or fear, but enough to let her breathe more freely, to see more clearly. "I should probably mention," Xavier said, his voice slightly unsteady, "that I've just compromised your reputation thoroughly by kissing you in my garden without benefit of engagement or marriage." Rachel laughed, the sound surprising and delightful. "I believe my reputation in Whispering Pines is beyond salvaging at this point. Besides," she added, "who's to know but us? And Alina, who I suspect is watching from the upstairs window," Xavier replied dryly. Rachel glanced up to see a curtain hastily drop back into place. "Your sister is not as subtle as she thinks she is." "No," Xavier agreed, "but she means well. She likes you very much, you know." "And I her," Rachel said sincerely. "She's become a dear friend in a short time." They sat together as twilight deepened around them, talking of small things and large, their childhoods, their dreams, the books they loved and the places they hoped to see. It was the conversation of two people discovering each other, layer by layer, with all the time in the world. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Xavier walked Rachel back to the house, their hands entwined. At the foot of the stairs, he paused. "I want to do this properly, Rachel," he said. "Court you as you deserve to be courted, give you time to be certain." Rachel touched his cheek, the stubble rough beneath her fingertips. "I'd like that. Though I think we're well past the stage of formal calling cards and chaperone visits." Xavier smiled. "Perhaps, but some traditions have value. I want to honor what's growing between us by giving it the respect it deserves." "Then court me, Xavier Reed," Rachel said softly. "Show me that love can be a beginning rather than an end." He brushed his lips against her forehead. "Every day," he promised, "starting tomorrow." True to his word, Xavier began a courtship that managed to be both respectful of tradition and uniquely theirs. He brought her wildflowers gathered during his rides across the ranch, read poetry with her in the evenings, and taught her to ride the gentlest mare in his stable. They picnicked in the meadows, fished in the creek that ran through the property, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. 2 weeks after their kiss in the garden, Xavier rode into town with Rachel to finalize the sale of her property. To their surprise, Mr. Hendricks offered to buy the land for a fair price. "My son's coming out from Pennsylvania with his wife next spring," he explained. "They'll need a place of their own, and that location is perfect, close to the store but with enough land for a garden." The transaction was completed quickly, with minimal fuss. As they left the lawyer's office, Rachel felt another link to her past life severed, but this time without pain. The money from the sale, combined with her savings, gave her a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. "What will you do with it?" Xavier asked as they walked toward the general store. "Your nest egg, as Alina calls it." Rachel had given this considerable thought. "I'd like to invest some of it in the ranch," she said, watching his reaction carefully, "if that's acceptable to you." Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her. "You want to invest in the XXX? Is that so surprising?" Rachel asked. It's a successful operation and I see my future there, Xavier, with you. The joy that spread across his face was answer enough, but he said, Nothing would make me happier, Rachel. Though you should know that I don't need your money, I want you, not your investment. I know that, Rachel assured him, but I want to contribute to be a true partner in every sense. Xavier lifted her gloved hand to his lips. Then, as your business partner and your devoted suitor, I accept your investment with gratitude. Their visit to town didn't go unnoticed. As they conducted their business at the general store, Rachel was aware of curious glances and whispered conversations. But where once those whispers would have cut deeply, now she found herself largely indifferent to them. They're talking about us, she murmured to Xavier as he paid for their purchases. Let them, he replied, unconcerned. They'll have even more to talk about soon enough. Before Rachel could ask what he meant, the door opened and Evelyn Turner entered, stopping short at the sight of them. Mrs. Morgan, she said coolly. I heard you sold your property, finally accepting that you're not welcome in Whispering Pines. Before Rachel could respond, Xavier stepped forward. Mrs. Turner, your continued rudeness toward Mrs. Morgan borders on harassment. I suggest you consider carefully whether you wish to continue in that vein. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me, Mr. Reed? Not at all, Xavier replied pleasantly, merely pointing out that Mrs. Morgan now has a significant investment in the XXX ranch, the very ranch that your husband's bank holds a substantial mortgage on. Business relationships can be so delicate, don't you think? Rachel stared at Xavier in surprise, while Evelyn's face flushed deep red. Charles never mentioned any mortgage, she sputtered. No, how odd. Perhaps he doesn't discuss all his business with you. Xavier placed his hat on his head. Good day, Mrs. Turner. Mr. Hendricks, thank you for your assistance. As they left the store, Rachel whispered, Is that true? About the mortgage, Xavier grinned. Not a word of it. The XXX has been free and clear for years, but Evelyn doesn't know that and her husband is too proud to admit it if she asks. Rachel couldn't help but laugh. Xavier Reed, you are a scoundrel. Only when necessary, he replied, helping her into the wagon, and only in defense of those I love. The word hung between them, simple but profound. Rachel felt her heart swell with emotion. Take me home, Xavier, she said softly. His eyes held hers for a long moment. With pleasure. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness for Rachel. She settled into life at the XXX, finding purpose in helping Alina manage the household, learning about the ranch operations from Xavier, and even assisting Mrs. Callahan with planning improvements to the kitchen garden. One evening in late October, as they sat in the library after dinner, Alina suddenly announced, I've had a letter from Aunt Margaret in Boston. She's invited me to stay for the winter season. Xavier looked up from his ledger. Are you considering it? I am, Alina admitted. I love the ranch, but I do miss certain aspects of city life. The concerts, the lectures at the university. She glanced meaningfully between Xavier and Rachel. And I think perhaps you two might appreciate some time alone. Rachel felt her cheeks warm. Though her relationship with Xavier had deepened over the weeks, they had maintained a careful propriety out of respect for Alina's presence. We would miss you terribly, she said sincerely. But if it's what you want, it is, Alina assured her. Just for the winter. I'll be back in the spring, she smiled mischievously. Perhaps for a wedding. Xavier closed his ledger with a snap. Alina, your subtlety continues to astound. Someone has to move things along, his sister replied cheerfully. At the rate you two are proceeding, I'll be an old maid before I get to be matron of honor. Rachel laughed despite her embarrassment. When would you leave? Next week, if Xavier can spare someone to accompany me to Denver for the train. Xavier nodded. Of course. Though I'll miss having you underfoot, pestering me at every turn. Alina threw a cushion at him, which he caught effortlessly. You'll be far too occupied to miss me, brother dear. After Alina retired for the night, Rachel and Xavier remained in the library, a comfortable silence between them. Finally, Xavier set aside the book he'd been pretending to read. Alina's right, you know, he said. I have been proceeding rather slowly in our courtship. Rachel looked up from her needlework. I haven't minded. These past weeks have been wonderful. For me as well, Xavier agreed, but I've been waiting for the right moment for something important. He rose and moved to the desk in the corner, retrieving a small box from a drawer. Rachel's heart began to race as he returned to sit beside her on the sofa. "I've been carrying this with me for 2 weeks," Xavier admitted, turning the box in his hands, waiting for the perfect moment. "But I'm beginning to think there is no perfect moment, only the moment we choose to make perfect." "Xavier," Rachel breathed, setting aside her sewing. He took her hand. "Rachel Morgan, when you came into my life, I wasn't looking for love. I had my ranch, my sister, my routines. I thought that was enough." His blue eyes held hers intently. "I was wrong. Meeting you showed me how much more life could be with the right person by my side." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "This was my mother's," he said. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman I loved beyond reason, a woman of strength and character who would be my true partner." Tears filled Rachel's eyes as Xavier slid from the sofa to one knee before her. "Rachel, I know we've known each other only a short time. I know you've endured loss that would break most people, and I know you may not be ready for this step." He held the ring between them. "But I love you with everything I am, and I'm asking you to be my wife. Not right away if you're not ready. I'll wait as long as you need. But I want you to know that my heart is yours, completely and forever." Rachel felt tears spill onto her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Xavier," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "when I lost James, I thought my heart had died with him. I never imagined I could feel this way again, alive, hopeful, looking toward the future instead of trapped in the past." She touched his face gently. "You didn't just offer me shelter when I had nowhere to go, you offered me respect when others gave only suspicion. You saw strength in me when I felt only weakness. You helped me remember who I am beyond grief and loss." "Is that a yes?" Xavier asked, hope shining in his eyes. "Yes," Rachel said firmly. "Yes, I will marry you, Xavier Reed. Not someday, not when the town approves or when enough time has passed to satisfy propriety. Soon, as soon as possible." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and passion they had kept carefully restrained over the weeks of their courtship. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "The town will talk," Rachel laughed softly. "Let them talk. I'm done living my life according to their expectations." Xavier's smile was radiant. "Then how about next month?" "That would give us time to make arrangements. Send for a justice of the peace from Denver if you'd prefer not to be married by Reverend Williams." "Next month is perfect," Rachel agreed. "And I don't mind Reverend Williams. He was kind when others weren't." She looked down at the ring on her finger, the sapphire catching the lamplight. "It's beautiful, Xavier. Your mother had excellent taste. She would have loved you," Xavier said, settling beside her on the sofa and drawing her close. "Almost as much as I do." Rachel nestled against him, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. The path that had led her here had been marked by loss and pain, but it had brought her to this moment, this man, this chance at happiness. "I love you, Xavier Reed," she whispered, "with all my heart." His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Rachel Morgan, soon to be Rachel Reed." They sat together in the quiet library, making plans for their future, dreaming of the life they would build together at the XXX. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, covering the land in a blanket of white, a clean slate, a fresh beginning. Eleanor's departure the following week was tearful but hopeful, with promises of letters and a return in the spring. "Take care of each other," she instructed as she boarded the stagecoach that would take her to Denver. "And don't you dare get married without me. We wouldn't dream of it," Xavier assured her, hugging his sister tightly. "We'll wait until the snow melts and you can return." After Eleanor had gone, the ranch settled into its winter rhythm. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, preparations were made for the cold months ahead, and Rachel found herself increasingly involved in the daily operations, learning from Xavier and offering her own insights. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Whispering Pines. Some, like Mr. Hendricks and Reverend Williams, sent notes of congratulation. Others, predictably, whispered about indecent haste and questionable motives. But Rachel, secure in Xavier's love and her own heart, found the gossip easier to ignore with each passing day. One snowy afternoon in early December, as Rachel was reviewing the household accounts in the library, the sound of horses in the yard drew her attention. She moved to the window to see Sheriff Miller dismounting, stamping snow from his boots before approaching the house. Xavier, who had been working in the barn, met him in the yard. Rachel couldn't hear their conversation, but something in Xavier's posture suddenly rigid. Alert sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter cold. When Xavier escorted the sheriff inside, his expression was grim. "Rachel," he said, "Sheriff Miller has news from town. Mrs. Morgan," the sheriff began, removing his hat. "I'm afraid there's been a development in the investigation of the fire." Rachel sank into a chair, her heart racing. "You found who did it?" "Not exactly," Sheriff Miller replied, glancing at Xavier, "but we've found evidence that suggests." "Well, that suggests the fire might not have been set with the intent to destroy your home specifically." "I don't understand," Rachel said, looking between the two men. Xavier sat beside her, taking her hand. "The sheriff believes the fire was meant for the neighboring house, the Wilsons. Apparently, Mr. Wilson had some gambling debts that he couldn't pay. We found a threatening letter in Wilson's things when his wife was packing to move to her sister's," Sheriff Miller explained. "It mentioned making an example of him if he didn't pay. And given the proximity of the houses in the dark, someone burned down my home by mistake," Rachel asked incredulously. "It appears so," the sheriff confirmed. "I've sent telegrams to authorities in Denver and other towns where Wilson was known to gamble. We're tracking down the men he owed money to." Rachel didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All the suspicion, all the whispers about her being cursed or worse, and it had been a simple, terrible mistake. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff," she managed. After the sheriff had gone, promising to keep them informed of any arrests, Rachel sat in stunned silence, Xavier's arm around her shoulders. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted finally. "Relieved that it wasn't directed at me personally. Angry that my life was upended over a case of mistaken identity. Or just sad for the randomness of it all. All of those feelings are valid," Xavier said gently. "What happened to you was unjust, whether it was targeted or not." Rachel leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "At least now we know, and the town will know too." "Will that matter to you?" Xavier asked carefully. Whether they believed the truth or not, Rachel considered the question. A month ago, it would have mattered tremendously. Now, she looked up at him, at the love and concern in his eyes. "Now I find I care far less about their opinions. My life is here with you. The past is just that past." Xavier pressed a kiss to her temple. "You continue to amaze me, Rachel Reed to be." "Reed to be," she repeated, smiling despite the tumult of emotions. "I like the sound of that." As winter deepened, the Triple X became increasingly isolated from town, the heavy snows making travel difficult. Rachel found she didn't mind. The ranch was largely self-sufficient, and the enforced solitude gave her and Xavier time to know each other more deeply, to plan their future together without interference from the outside world. They decided to marry in April, when Alina returned and the worst of winter had passed. In the meantime, they established their routines, learned each other's habits and quirks, and built the foundation of their life together. By the time the first signs of spring appeared, crocuses pushing through the melting snow, longer days, the return of birdsong, Rachel felt more herself than she had in years. The grief that had defined her for so long hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed, becoming a part of her story rather than the whole of it. Alina returned in late March, full of stories about Boston society but clearly happy to be home. "The city has its charms," she declared as she unpacked, "but I missed the open spaces, and the two of you, of course." With Alina's help, preparations for the wedding accelerated. Reverend Williams would perform the ceremony at the ranch with only a small gathering of friends in attendance. Rachel had her blue dress altered and enhanced with new lace for the occasion, refusing Xavier's offer to purchase a new gown in Denver. "This dress has meaning," she explained. "It was the first time you saw me as something other than a widow in mourning. I want to wear it when I become your wife." The day before the wedding, a letter arrived from Whispering Pines. Rachel recognized Evelyn Turner's handwriting on the envelope and almost discarded it unopened. But curiosity won out. Inside was a brief note, Mrs. Morgan, Sheriff Miller has informed the town council that arrests have been made in connection with the fire that destroyed your home. The men in question have confessed to setting the blaze, confirming that it was indeed a case of mistaken location, as the Wilson property was their intended target. In light of this information, and upon reflection of my own behavior, I find myself compelled to offer an apology for the unjust accusations and treatment you received, particularly from myself and my husband. While words cannot undo the harm caused, I hope they might begin to address the wrong done to you. Should you return to Whispering Pines, you would find a changed reception. Regards, Evelyn Turner. Rachel handed the letter to Xavier, watching his expression as he read it. Well, he said when he finished, it seems even Evelyn Turner is capable of growth. Or at least of recognizing which way the wind is blowing, Rachel replied dryly. With the truth now known, she can't afford to be on the wrong side of public opinion. Xavier set the letter aside. Does her apology matter to you? Rachel considered the question. Not as much as it once would have. It's satisfying to be vindicated, but it doesn't change anything, not really. She moved to the window, looking out at the ranch that had become her home. My life is here now with you. What happened in Whispering Pines led me to this place, this moment. For that, I can almost be grateful for all of it, even Evelyn Turner's cruelty. Xavier came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. Tomorrow you'll be my wife, he murmured against her hair. Mrs. Rachel Reed. Rachel leaned back against him, savoring the strength and warmth of him. It still seems like a dream sometimes, that I found you, that you love me, that we're building this life together. If it's a dream, Xavier said, turning her in his arms, then it's one I never want to wake from. The next day dawned clear and mild, perfect for an April wedding. The ranch was transformed with spring flowers, the main room arranged for the ceremony with chairs borrowed from neighbors. By midday, the guests had arrived. Mr. Hendricks and his wife, Reverend Williams, Sheriff Miller and his family, and several neighboring ranchers with whom Xavier did business. To Rachel's surprise, a few familiar faces from Whispering Pines also appeared: the schoolteacher who had always been kind, the blacksmith and his wife who had never joined in the gossip, even Charles Turner, though Evelyn was conspicuously absent. I didn't expect so many from town, Rachel murmured to Alina as they prepared in the upstairs bedroom. Xavier sent invitations to those who had shown you kindness, or at least fairness, Alina explained, adjusting Rachel's hair. He wanted them to witness your happiness. Rachel felt tears threaten. He thinks of everything. He loves you, Alina said simply. Now, no crying. Your eyes are too pretty to be red on your wedding day. When it was time, Alina went downstairs first, taking her place as Rachel's attendant. Rachel paused at the top of the stairs, suddenly overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. Twice she had walked this path before, believing each time that her love would last a lifetime. Twice she had been left alone, grief-stricken, but today felt different. Not because she loved Xavier more than she had loved Thomas or James. Love couldn't be measured that way, but because she had changed. She had endured loss and pain, had faced judgment and cruelty, and had emerged stronger, more certain of herself and what she wanted from life. She descended the stairs slowly, her blue dress rustling softly. At the bottom, Xavier waited, more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his blue eyes fixed on her with such love that Rachel felt her heart might burst from joy. As she placed her hand in his, Xavier whispered, "You take my breath away." "As you do mine," she replied softly. They turned together to face Reverend Williams, ready to speak the vows that would join their lives officially, though in their hearts, they had already made that commitment long ago. The ceremony was simple but profound, their voices clear and steady as they promised to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. When Xavier slipped a gold band alongside the engagement ring on Rachel's finger, his hands were gentle but sure, his eyes never leaving hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Williams declared. "Xavier, you may kiss your bride." Xavier cupped Rachel's face with tender hands and kissed her, a kiss that held promise and passion and devotion. The gathered guests applauded, but Rachel barely heard them, lost in the moment, in the man who was now her husband. The celebration that followed was joyful, with food and music and dancing. Rachel moved through it all in a haze of happiness, Xavier never far from her side, their hands finding each other instinctively throughout the day. As evening approached and the guests began to depart, Charles Turner approached them. "Mrs. Reed," he said formally, "I want to extend my congratulations and my apologies. The town treated you shamefully. I treated you shamefully." Rachel, feeling generous in her happiness, offered her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Turner. Your apology is accepted." After he had gone, Xavier raised an eyebrow. "That was magnanimous of you. It costs nothing to be gracious in victory," Rachel replied with a smile. "Besides, I find I can't hold on to anger today, not when I'm so filled with joy." When the last guest had departed and Alina had tactfully retired to her room, Xavier took Rachel's hand. "Come with me," he said, leading her outside. The evening was mild, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Xavier guided her to the apple orchard, now in full bloom, the white blossoms luminous in the twilight. "I wanted a moment alone with my wife before we returned to the house," he explained, drawing her into his arms. "To tell you, without an audience, how much I love you, how grateful I am that you found the courage to believe in love again, to believe in us." Rachel reached up to touch his face, memorizing the beloved features with her fingertips. "Loving you has been the easiest, most natural thing I've ever done," she said softly. "Even when I was afraid, even when I doubted, my heart knew you were worth the risk." Xavier kissed her, a kiss deep with promise and desire. "Mrs. Reed," he murmured against her lips, "shall we go inside? I believe we have a wedding night to begin." Rachel smiled, taking his hand and leading him toward the house now, their home, the foundation of their life together. "Lead the way, Mr. Reed. We have the rest of our lives ahead of us, and I don't want to waste a moment." As they walked together beneath the flowering trees, Rachel felt the final shadows of her past recede. Ahead lay only light and love, and the promise of tomorrow with the man who had asked if she still believed in love and had given her every reason to answer yes.